everybody. We're here for creative writing. It's going to be fun. It's going to be fun because creative writing is one of those things, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. I'm the senior copywriter at Best Friends Animal Society. Have been for 12 years. Write their fundraising appeals and all that stuff. It's fun. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit about creative writing. Before I was that, I was a romance novelist. Yeah, the good kind. I did the historical ones with the pirates capturing damsels. I did. I wrote 7 of them. I wasn't really that good. But you know, once you get your first book published, you can get, it's easier. The publishing house keeps coming back and they'll keep taking you even though the critics say you're sarcastic. And then Best Friends Animal Society stole me away from that life. And I also was with Austin Pets Alive as a volunteer in the 1990s. A lot of people didn't know Austin Pets Alive existed in the 1990s because we didn't have Ellen yet. But we did actually exist. We did. And I did a lot of things, like I would go to the shelter and I would find animals that were in trouble, and I ran the no-kill handbill and stuff like that. So I've been writing about animals for a very, very long time, and I've been writing fundraising materials for a decade or so too. And those who taught me always told me that one word can cost us $1 million, and I think that that is true. I think that that is true. I think there's no doubt that if you send out a good fundraising appeal, you make more money than if you send out a bad fundraising appeal. Not that other things don't play a factor, like your mailing list or when you sent your last one or what the photos look like, but this is one of the things that makes a difference in how much return you get. And we're going to talk about just generally writing all kinds of things for your organization. So creative writing is not just for people who failed math, although many creative writing careers have started exactly that way. It's actually very useful. People don't think of creative writing as being very useful. It sounds very frivolous. People think of creative writers as sort of being in a smoky basement, dodging the landlord because they haven't paid the rent in a really, really long time. And there can be some truth to that. There can be some truth to that. But we also make excellent statues, as you see. That's Dostoevsky. And we actually can do some practical things for an organization. We can make people give more money. We can make people adopt more pets. We can make people like your organization. We can make people volunteer, write letters to city officials, come to events. We can do some very useful things for such strange people. And the reason we talk about creative writing and not journalism or something like that is that creative writing is the art of invoking emotions out of people, right? So you're writing a romance novel. You're trying to make somebody feel something, right? And when somebody feels something, they're a lot more likely to do something. So you actually want a creative writer in there. When I hire writers, I tend to not hire journalists. They tend to be very concerned with facts. One of the best fundraising and marketing techniques is to tell me a story. They'll teach you that at any development communications course. And creative writers are good at telling stories, making them engaging. And creative writers can't really do anything else, so it is a public service to employ us. Okay, words are powerful. Yeah, you know that expression about pictures worth 1,000 words? I hate that expression. I hate that expression. Every photographer uses that expression. I can't stand that expression. Words are very powerful. I used to get animals adopted without a photograph. I'm not putting down the photographers out there. I'm just saying that when I ran the no-kill handbill and I did descriptions of animals that were at the city shelter, I had no photographs. Didn't have that kind of technology. Was able to get animals adopted just by describing them. Words are powerful. So let's, just for fun, let's pretend we're writing a fundraising appeal. I know you can't read this thing. It's tediously long. But let's just take a look at what one looks like, okay? So you've got this thing up top, it's called a Johnson box. That's the part in orange, that's a little bit of text that's separated from the rest. It pulls out the meat of the story that you're going to tell. Because a lot of people are not going to read the whole letter. You need to write the whole letter for the people who do, but you also need to keep in mind the people who are not going to read the whole letter. So you pull out the juice of the story in the Johnson box at top. Then you'll kind of notice there's a lot of white space around the paragraphs. That's really important. This is the general structure. And don't forget a PS. Some people only read the PS of a letter, and most people read it first. Most people read the PS first, then go back and read the letter. Some people read the PS and don't read anything else, so don't forget a PS. And don't forget to ask for money in the PS in case that's the only thing they read. Okay? That's just a general structure. I'm not going to read that whole thing to you because we're going to go back over the pieces of making it. So we're not going to. Okay. This is a little bit closer look at it. Nobody was expecting a happy outcome for Pluto, probably not even Pluto, but just look at him now. You've renewed his body and his life. So that pulls out the essence of the story. Then you start, dear members and friends, and back up. And it always does begin with a story. And this isn't just for fundraising appeals. You might have content on your website you need to put up. You might be keeping a blog on your website. You might be writing an article for a newspaper about your organization. A lot of times it starts with telling a story of something that y'all are doing that you're hoping will inspire people. You need, for all of these kinds of things, stewardship, marketing, a lot of times you need a story. So what's a good story to tell when you're reaching out to members, either for fundraising or for your blog or for whatever else? One name, one face. People start emotionally detaching at the number 2. I will occasionally do a story about a pair of kittens, but I have to make it really good because I know that I'm coming from behind when I'm writing about 2 and not 1. I know that there's some emotional detachment that took place when I went from 1 to 2. And so I have to make up for that emotional detachment with the quality of the letter. You never want to write about a crowd. You never want to write about 500 animals that you saved as the lead-in, because people have no connection. People emotionally detach from crowds. And the last thing I want anybody to do is emotionally detach. I want them emotionally right there with me. So the best thing to pick is 1 animal. You can do 2, as I said, but each number you go up, you're losing some emotional attachment. So instead of last week, 1,328 cats were admitted, 423 of them had FIV, while 219 had feline leukemia. A total of 146 were adopted, which is all impressive, but it leaves no emotional mark. We want to do Muffin arrived last week with FIV and feline leukemia and without a friend in the world, but today he's been adopted into a happy home. In fact, he's just one of 1,328 cats whose lives we saved thanks to you in the past 7 days. So we used the 1 to pull you in, and then we mentioned the bigger numbers, because we didn't want to sacrifice emotional attachment just to get those impressive numbers in. So I call it a little bit of a pyramid technique. You grab them with 1 animal, then you go down to mention more animals, and then you can do the thick base of the pyramid. So you got 1 animal to like wedge into their consciousness. Then you bring it up because you've made a little hole there. You can bring it down to mention the other 243, and then you wedge the whole thing in, which is, and of course we also run spay-neuter programs that's saving thousands of lives, 1 Sebastian at a time. Bringing it full circle, we went from 1 animal to a few animals to all the animals. It's useful sometimes. Why tell success stories? That's a tough one. Because this can be tempting. Help! We're out of food, our electricity has been shut off, and the landlord is threatening to evict us. I'm so sorry to be writing you again, but if anything, the situation has only gotten worse. We've done everything we can, but if we don't get more funding soon, who knows what will happen to the animals. P.S. What you see in this photo is all that's left of our administrative building. We think the neighbors did it, so please send money. It's urgent. That can be very tempting. And one of the reasons it can be tempting is because it might be true. But here's the problem with that appeal. How many times can you send it? Okay, how many times? And what I look at is, what I make a comparison of is my brother, who I'm not picking on, but let's just say that some random person, let's say me, calls you from a payphone, because it's the 1980s, and says, oh my gosh, you're not going to believe this. I lost my job, my tire's flat. It's raining out. I can't even find a place to stay, a hotel to stay at. Could you wire me some money? Could you Western Union me some money tonight? The first time, you're going to be like, oh my gosh, of course I am. I'm so sorry. Here you go, okay? The second time you get the same phone call from the same 1980s payphone in the same rain because he's in the same situation again, you're going to say, you're going to pause a second. You're going to think, what good did the last money I do actually, what was actually accomplished by the last money I sent him? He's in the same spot again. Okay, no problem. All right, I'll send it to you again. Okay, the seventh time you get that phone call, all right, you're going to start to think the problem is him. And you're going to think that no amount of money you send him is going to solve this problem. And so that's called long-term fundraising, okay? This could work in the short term, but how long is this going to work? And so that's why you have to be a little bit careful of this one. I know it is tempting. So how many times can you say it? Or remember, don't say you're a failure. Say you're a good investment. So particularly, did you notice on that one it said, I'm sorry I wrote you before, things have only gotten worse since then. That didn't make it sound like I was a very good investment, did I? Right? So remember, you're trying to say that I'm a good investment. When you give me money, good things happen. I help animals. You don't want to say when you give me money, nothing happens. Don't undermine your message of competence by saying the sky is falling every time you have a request, okay? At Best Friends, we also keep it positive for another reason, but this is more of a personal choice. Just our relationships and our brand, we just sort of have an agreement with our niche market that like we're not gonna scare you with horrible things happening. And that's keeping an eye on your brand and your relationships and what people expect of you. It's just sort of what we want to put out into the world. We don't like to send people gory pictures. And that's a little bit more of a personal choice. The competence thing is really a fundraising issue. But just keeping it a little more positive is more of a personal choice. There's just a certain segment of the population who doesn't like this. Animals are suffering and we're miserable, you should be too. Instead, they want, we're helping animals and we're thrilled to join us. That works better on some people. Okay, but what about the sad parts? So if you're telling a story and it has some sad parts, do you just pretend it didn't happen? No, you just change the emphasis. So instead of, Bambi was hit on the head and left in a dumpster. Bambi's not real, people, not real. I totally made that up. People do that kind of thing all the time around here, and it's only getting worse. Join us to stop it. Well, you notice how I said it's only getting worse, right? That one was a little cheat, because that's bad right there. You know, how long have you been in business and things are only getting worse? But this is putting all the focus on that. Instead, you can say, Bambi must think he's woken up in heaven. He was hit over the head and left in a dumpster. But then something miraculous happened. You brought him back from the brink by being part of this organization, and today he's alive, snuggled up in a blanket, and having his little chin rubbed. He's going to be just fine. There are more Bambis out there, more animals who think it's all over, and together we can continue to help them. And so I've told you the part about how he got hit over the head and left in a dumpster, but I changed the emphasis completely to leave you feeling empowered. Okay, now what if I don't know any stories? Some people may work hands-on with animals, and some people may not, right? So what if you're, head of your organization or something, and you aren't always with the animals or whatever, and you have to find a story to write about, or you're the writer, and you aren't every day with the animals. What if you don't know all the stories that happen in your organization? Well, you have to ask, but you have to ask carefully, because let me show you what they're going to tell you the first time you ask. They're going to tell you all about the animal they really want to see adopted. Okay, and you got to remind them that's not the point of this. Like you have an adoptable page that has those little advertisements about the animals who want to be adopted, but that's not the point of what you're writing now. Right now, you need an animal who exemplifies everything your organization does, even if he's not their favorite or whatnot. And this is not what you want. A story about an animal a staff member adopted. They're going to love to tell you the story of the animal they themselves adopted. Look, if this is the story that exemplifies everything you're about, what message is that sending? It's saying, here at such and such animal organization, we rescue animals and keep them. That can't be the exemplifying story, okay? I know it's exciting you adopted an animal, but that can't be it. An announcement about the new executive coordinating director of networking, nobody cares. And as long as you're writing a fundraising appeal, could you mention our rubber ducky sale and our Adopt One, Get 57 promotion? Everyone's going to try to tack on to your message. Remember, one ask. You need to ask one thing. And especially when your appeals or whatever else you're writing start to bring in big results, people are going to want to piggyback. I run into this all the time. People are going to go, oh, the response rate on that was phenomenal. Next time, could you also mention something totally irrelevant, and maybe I can get a response rate on that too? No, 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 you're going to bring my response rate down. No, no, no. One ask. You ask them to do one thing or else you're dividing the river. Okay, also remember to keep the focus outward on the animals. This is something that's very tempting, and there's nothing wrong with doing this once in a while, but be aware that you don't accidentally wind up doing this every time. One night, our volunteer coordinator, Jackie, was driving into town when she noticed a bundle of fur on the side of the road. She hit her brakes, discovered it was a shivering black cat. She wasted no time getting a blanket from her truck. This is a story about a volunteer coordinator named Jackie. She's the main character, okay? If you want a story about an animal, you make the animal the main character. One night, Malcolm the cat was shivering by the side of the road. He'd just been hit by a car and couldn't move. Then headlights came toward him. Now he's the main character, she's the side character. Nothing wrong with doing a story every now and then about a volunteer coordinator, but if you're not careful, they're all going to be stories about humans that are supposed to be stories about animals. Partly because that's the way people will tell them when you're getting it. It's going to be about them a little bit. So you have to be aware of changing it around from how they tell it. Remember, this is all relationship building. Nobody likes a show-off. People like to be liked, right? Nobody wants to like you. They want you to like them, right? So the trick is, so it's the same thing whenever you're relating to membership or the public. People will like you better if they think you like them. And so one thing in that is you want to brag without taking the credit. You want to brag about all your accomplishments, but remember to thank the reader and don't thank yourself. Thanks to us, this animal was blah, blah, blah. People recoil from that a little bit. They don't like it. It's better relationship skills to give credit to you, thanks to you and your support. People like that. They like that much better. And remember that your staff is you, okay? So if you say, thanks to our such and such, named blah, 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 remember to save that for the internal newsletter. This is flattering the public, okay? Save that stuff for the internal newsletter. Okay, so now it's time to sit down and write. Now you found a story that's going to work, that's going to be the right one. So now we've got to sit down and write. You got to learn to love your keyboard, okay? Now this is really important. A lot of people don't like to write. But you got to. It's one of those things that, as I said, if you're not having fun, you're not doing it right. You got to approach the keyboard with an attitude. You got to sit down, not knowing what you're going to say verbally, but you got to sit down with that feeling. Like, so if your feeling is you're trying to find an animal at home, you got to be like, okay, this animal's going home, and you got to sit down and you feel it flowing through you. A keyboard is an emotion transmitter, and they can feel if you feel it. They can feel it if you feel it. If you're trying to sit down and write something to make money, you got to be like, this thing is going to make so much money. You got to sit down like you're just going to kill it. And you got to feel that. You got to feel it. There's no left brain way to approach that. You gotta do that with your right brain. Don't do what we all did in college, try to bore the professor into giving you an A. Yeah, we all know that worked, right? If you used enough academies or however you say that word, he's not gonna read it. It's gonna be so cumbersome, he's not gonna read it. He's just gonna be impressed by the language and give you an A so that he doesn't have to explain his C because he didn't finish it. It absolutely works. It absolutely works. It's a terrible habit to get into, to try to write in a way that draws a lot of attention to your words and a lot of attention to you instead of a lot of attention to the feeling you're trying to transmit. It can happen in the work world too. You can get in bad habits in academia. You can also get in bad habits in the work world. If you work at a place where when people go, hi, I have an idea for something we could do, and people go, whatever. But then the guy next to you goes, I'd like to propose a strategic initiative. And they go, oh my gosh, give that man a promotion, right? Okay, if you work in a place like that, then you're picking up a bad habit, which is using language that makes you look good when you need to use language that moves people and they don't even notice you. So you have to break out of that self-consciousness that gets rewarded in other venues and not try to draw any attention to yourself as the writer when you write. It's got to be all, I don't care what they think of me. I'm not trying to get a promotion. I'm not trying to get an A. I just care that they do what I want them to do, okay? You got to take yourself out of it that way, if that makes any sense. So you've got to feel it in your veins before you sit down. And if you have to pace around a little bit, not that I ever pace, but if you have to pace around a little bit, if you have to punch the air a little bit, before you sit down at that keyboard, do what you got to do. You cannot work this out in the left side of your brain. You cannot work this out with an outline or something like that. Don't ever use an outline. You cannot work this out with an outline or something like this. You got to just know that you're attacking this and it's going to work. And just nothing's going to stand in the way. It's going to work. Remember, you can't wait for inspiration. The reason everyone you know is writing a novel and nobody you know is going to finish it is because they are all waiting for inspiration. You're going to get at most 24 pages of inspiration in the course of your life. That's not enough. That's not enough for a book. You got to be able to write even when you don't have that, whoa! You got to be able to do it at the drop of the dime at any time. You can't just sit around waiting until you feel relaxed. You become prolific by relaxing. Writing should be as easy as talking. Nobody ever gets talker's block. It's true. Nobody's ever just talking and suddenly, that never happens because it doesn't make any sense. And it doesn't happen with writers either. It's a myth. There's no such thing as writer's block. Writing is just talking with your hands. So there's no difference. As long as you can talk, you can write. I do recommend getting to be a very fast typist if you do a lot of this stuff. It really helps because it takes away the barrier between your brain and getting the words to the outside world if you don't have to think about where the keys are. In fact, you can type. If you can type much faster than you can talk, then it's a much faster way to get it out there before it gets filtered or lost than talking is. Because your brain, it's firing 1,000,000 times a second, and you miss most of it. Most of it just dissipates. You can't grab it fast enough. But if you write, you can grab more of it before it's gone. And the best way to make that true is if you become a speed typist. I do recommend trying to get up to at least 100. 120 is better. Because it just removes that barrier. It's really, really important to be able to type. I learned to type on a video game. You blow away the spaceships by typing in the words on them, That was motivating. Okay, don't forget to create a narrator. How am I doing on time? Halfway, great. Thank you. Create a narrator. The narrator is the person talking to you, but you're not aware that it's the person talking to you. I'm usually not me, so it isn't you. I'm usually not me. I'm usually the CEO of my organization or something when I'm writing. I'm usually somebody else. And I have to do different people. So I have to change my voice. If somebody's British, I have to sound British. So I'm usually not me. Other people sign my work. And you have to decide who you're going to be before you sit down. That's the person talking to you who doesn't announce him or herself. A lot of times I'm a man, too, so you have to sort of adjust that. And you have to sort of, a writer's like an actress. You have to sort of become that person before you sit down so that you naturally know how that person's talking. Sometimes I'll have a lot of lunches with somebody first before I start imitating them so that I can pick up on their speech patterns and it'll become second nature. To find your inner narrator, yeah, that's like almost exactly what I just said. It's the unannounced character who whispers in people's ears, okay? And their feeling of closeness to that person is going to have a lot to do with their responsiveness to what that person says. So you've got to be writing in such a way that they feel a little affinity with you. They feel like they know you, and not so much they like you, but that you like them, right? Because that's what people want more than to like you, right? So be careful not to choose some of these narrators. This one I call the angry teenager narrator, and I have this one inside somewhere. Chelsea came to our rescue center because some jerk dropped her off at the doorstep. We're so sick of people like that, okay? One of your volunteers wrote that? I think I read that. Maybe I just... We all have that inside somewhere, and that'll get a lot of you go girls on Facebook. It will. A lot of people will be like, I'm so down with you. But those you go girls don't often come with $1 million donations. Actually, people that get a lot of you go girls because they sound really visceral like this have a harder time approaching people with, I'm a really organized, responsible investment to make. Just remember to keep future fundraising in mind. Does this narrator sound like someone who can approach people with what a good investment they are, even though a lot of people will relate to the feeling, you know? I call that my angry teenager because that's how I talked all the time when I was 16, you know? Let's see, and here's another problematic narrator. Sarah arrived in desperate need of medical attention and a hug. The poor thing was shivering in fear and covered with fleas. Fleas are wingless external parasites whose bodies are laterally compressed. This is called the inconsistent narrator. And this is where somebody's manager came in and added a sentence. And when you break voice, that's what it's called, breaking voice, when you let people write by committee, there is no longer a narrator. And so nobody thinks that anyone's talking to them. And so they don't develop a relationship with that voice, and they're going to be less responsive, okay? But you can do lots of different narrators. There's not just one. Lots of different narrators work. The caring gentleman or gentlewoman works. It was a dark day when Jeremiah arrived on our doorstep. There's not a soul among us who wasn't saddened by his seemingly callous abandonment, but I'm delighted to be able to share with you that today his days of rejection are behind him and he's thriving. That's a very caring gentleman, caring gentlewoman that works. But you can be younger. You can do the child narrator sometimes. Poor Jeremiah, he has the floppiest ears you've ever seen and the saddest, droopiest eyes. How could anyone throw him out of a car? And yet you were there to catch him. The advantage of the inner child narrator is that she is emotional, but her predominant emotion isn't anger, as opposed to the teenager, who is primarily emotional, but primarily angry emotional. The child is primarily emotional, not primarily angry. And so she can be used a little bit sometimes, particularly on adoption blurbs. That can be very compelling when you're trying to get an animal adopted. Oh, yeah, make sure there is a narrator. In conjunction with XYZ M42 Animal Control District of the 2nd Precinct of Narcoleptic County, in cooperation with and in compliance with Health Bill. Okay, some people write like this. Don't let them write, okay? Yeah, there is no narrator in that. There's no human being. A computer wrote that or something. Remember that writing is music, okay? I need to hear you. If you're a voice in my head, I need to hear you. You know, when I talk, there's a melody and a rhythm. Everybody has a melody and a rhythm. Punctuation creates some melody. Before a question mark, your voice goes up a little bit, and before a period, it goes down. There's a melody and a rhythm, and you need to create that when you write. It needs to sound like somebody talking, and you need to hear how the rhythm and the melody sound. The way you change the rhythm is with punctuation. So I like to think of a period as a full stop on music, 1, 2, 3, 4, semicolon as a half stop, 1, 2, a comma is a quarter stop, one little breath, okay? So this is how we affect the rhythm of the sentence. Sammy thought he didn't have a friend in this world until he came here. Sammy thought he didn't have a friend in this world until he came here. I'm sorry, I read that wrong. Sammy thought he didn't have a friend in this world until he came here. Sammy thought he didn't have a friend in this world until he came here. And all of those sentences are changed in their melody and rhythm just by the punctuation. So listen to yourself as you write. Hear it, okay? Because you know, people can read different ways. Sometimes when they're reading, they hear someone talk, they hear the voice in their head as they talk, as they're reading the book, and sometimes they're just using their eyes to read. And you don't want them just using their eyes to read. You want them to hear the little voice as they go along, and the way you do that is by having a really good voice for them to hear. So, because when you get that voice, then you get them believing there's a person talking to them, then they want to have a relationship with that person, then they want to do what that person's asking them to do. You need that relationship, okay? So you gotta have a voice. Dump the details in your story. Nobody needs to know that it was actually a friend of his grandmother's who dropped off the dog because he had worked that day and his grandmother had promised to bring the dog in, but then she had a health issue and couldn't make it at the last minute. But her friend, who also rescues basset hounds, by the way, said that she should bring the dog just as soon as she drove the grandmother to the doctor's office. Just tell us the dog arrived. That's another problem with journalists. Oh, boy. They have to tell you every single thing that happened. No. Just every sentence it's like a novel. Every sentence either moves the plot forward, develops the character, connects the story. I'm sorry, was that? Ooh. Connects the story to what's going on in your organization. Every story should do one of those things. Every sentence should do one of those things. If it doesn't do one of those things, just drop it. The little details don't matter. Nobody needs to know. The rest can be left out. Your chosen animal is the hero of your story, so develop his or her character. Remember, we show, we don't tell. We don't say Maximus was brave and rather nonchalant. We say Maximus lounged casually on the rail of his pirate ship, petting a crocodile as lightning struck the shipmast. And it's the action, it's verbs, not adjectives, that develop character. We tell you what they did. We don't tell you how they are with adjectives. Okay, that's character development. The animal story is the plot, but the theme is the reason you're telling the story. So if you're trying to get them to give you support, if you're trying to get them to give you money, if you're trying to get them to adopt an animal, remember to keep making sure as you go along that you're building that case. Remember your image. In business, they call it a brand. I don't like that word as a words person because it reminds me of toothpaste. But what they mean is just your reputation. It's a fancy way of saying your reputation. So watch out for your reputation, your image. Make sure that you maintain it throughout all of your writing. Don't ever let that person write that one brand destroying email, the one where they're seriously outraged by something the city council has just done, and on your behalf they send out this irate email or something, because they've just hurt your reputation for when you go back and fundraise. And I know that in the moment it can seem like any little thing can be more important than the long term, but no little thing is more important than the long term. You always got to maintain your image. And it can be little things too, like where I work, we never say things that are kind of off color or inappropriate, like about spay-neuter or something like that. You know, there can be jokes that people make about those things and stuff, but we don't do that because it's just kind of not us. And you have to think about things like that ahead of time. Is that something that y'all are cool with? Is that funny, or is that getting a little, to make a joke like that? You know, you need to think about that and then keep that consistent through all of your correspondences. And that means you gotta watch all your correspondences. You gotta watch them. Position your brand as you go along, that's sort of development talk. But that's sort of what I just said. And your narrator should know your brand intuitively. If you need to give a style guide to your lead writer, you are already in trouble. You really are. Your lead writer should not need a style guide to tell her or him what y'all are all about. Your narrator needs to know your brand intuitively. A style guide is very helpful for somebody who doesn't normally write, but might need to once or twice, like here are some rules, you know. But the person who's doing all your interaction with the outside world, boy, you better hope that person has already grasped it. Include emotional details. Remember that people don't remember facts very well, they remember emotions. So if you and I have lunch today and then I see you next year, you are not going to remember what I told you my guinea pig's name is. You are not. But you're going to remember instantly how you felt about me. As soon as you see me, you're either going to be like, oh my God, it's her, hide. Or you're going to be like, oh, I really liked her, hi. But you're not going to remember all the facts of our conversation. People don't remember facts well, they remember emotions instantly. So you want them, when they see the name of your organization, to have a positive emotional response instantly, okay? Don't rely on facts to give them a positive image of you, because they're not going to remember. They're not going to remember everything you told them. They're just going to remember how you made them feel. That's how people are. They remember how you made them feel. Develop an emotional image as you go along. Joey didn't just come to your state-of-the-art clinic, which performed 50,258 surgeries last fall. He came to your place of healing, a bright light in the fog for street animals with injuries. You create an emotional image of the place. Relationship building. Also remember to speak in a language the reader can understand. I alluded to this earlier. Be the same person every time you write, have a writing voice. Speak in a language they can understand, and one of the biggest dangers in the animal welfare world is that you're going to speak internal rescuees to the public, because everyone in this room understands what you're talking about. What is a rescue dog? What is a rescue dog? I know what you all think a rescue dog is. What is it to everyone else? To y'all, it's an adopted dog. To everyone else, it's a Dalmatian on the back of a fire truck. Yeah, what you're talking about is a rescued dog with a D at the end. If it's a rescue dog, it's a search and rescue dog to most people out there. Be very careful of the things that we all understand, but you're reaching out to people who are not in the animal welfare world at all, and the words can mean something different to them. Be careful of the connotations. When we're not familiar with a term, we see it a little more in its usual connotations. So to us, there's nothing weird about transporting a dog. To everyone else, what do we normally transport? Do we transport the kids to school? We transport cargo. We transport things that are not alive and don't have feelings. So we don't actually want to give that emotional image when we're talking about animals. We don't want to talk about them as things by mistake. That's not what we mean, but to somebody else, that's the connotation. Colleges don't have intake. Prisons have intake. Okay? So we want to be talking about something where people have a more positive image. So let's avoid intake. Sewage systems have intake. It's true. So don't get caught up in this internal jargon that doesn't mean that to us. Think about the image you're presenting to people who are not here, okay? Avoid used car salesmanese, act now, and this kind of stuff. People think it's scams, especially if you're sending it in the email. Try to sound genuine. Try to sound, sometimes you know, it's okay to be catchy, it's okay to be peppy, but be aware of sounding like a used car salesman. It can happen especially in marketing. Avoid corporatese. It's not an emotionally sensitive dialect. It's a dialect that was created to protect the lady at the DMV from all the angry people in line. Okay, it gives her a way to talk to them. Everyone step to the left. It gives her a way to talk to them that protects her emotionally from them. And the last thing I want to do is put a distance between us. I want you to come really close while I'm talking to you in my letters. I want you to come really close. I do not want to use a language that has been designed to push you away from me. I want a language that is designed to bring you really, really close, okay? Yeah, none of this, your attention is mandatory. And sometimes people will put it at the bottom. They'll like put a really nice, we could use volunteers, blah, 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 and then they'll be like, volunteers must be 18 age and up, and you must fill out a form. It's like, you just turned into, Okay, so resensitize yourself. Be very sensitive. It's a disadvantage in life to be sensitive, but it's a huge advantage as a writer. You want to have very raw nerves. You want to be easily hurt. You want to be very sensitive when you sit down, because that's who people are going to feel. That's who people are going to feel. Remember, poor writers only have one person in the room while they write. Good writers have two people. They can feel the heartbeat of the other person who's hearing their words as they write. So it's not about me and I'd like to communicate. Oh, and I want to be sure to communicate. There's two of us, okay? Structure issues, use short paragraphs, allow lots of white space. The best way to handle, I feel, people with different education levels and reaching different people. Use simple vocabulary. Vocabulary, absolutely everyone's going to know. Don't use any unnecessarily long words. But keep your grammar right, because that's how we tell you that I'm communicating with everybody of all education levels, but we have an education, okay? So if I start to misuse grammar, if I start hopefully, luckily, all this kind of stuff, if I start doing the subjective pronoun after, a preposition or something like that, it's gonna, to people who know grammar, it's gonna make you look bad. And the people who don't know grammar aren't gonna care either way. But the people who do know grammar are gonna do this at you. So I would say simple vocabulary, correct grammar. The best way to deal with the prepositions, I think, is to memorize them, actually. Okay. So let's look at that appeal again. Spring is a time of renewal, and nobody needed renewal quite like Pluto. Well, because of you, what could the future hold for a dog like that? Well, because of you, it held all the promise in the world. And then we go down to all the other work that goes on, blah, blah, blah. I really shouldn't read this because I'm about out of time, sorry. And then P.S., please enjoy the enclosed spring newsletter full of stories about the lives that have been renewed by your kindness. Then please use the enclosed form to make a donation today. Remember, in the P.S., always ask them for money, because some people are only going to read the P.S. And then there's usually a little slip that goes with it for people to reply. And there's a lot of debate about the order, the $25, $50, $100 order. And what we do is we just test it all the time. We send half the people ascending order and half the people descending order, and we see which one gets better responses. We just test it. And traditionally, ending with a 5 has been good, but actually we did better ending with some weird number, like a 7 last time. So I don't know. Here's another one, but I don't have time. So notes on emails. Make emails even shorter than direct mail. Direct mail appeals can be as long as you need to make them good. But email appeals need to be short. People on the internet are notoriously impatient, really impatient. Use even more white space around the paragraphs. When you're doing an email, sometimes you only want to do one sentence per paragraph in an email. Your English teacher would not approve, but sometimes you want to make them that short so that it just looks at first glance like something that would be easy to read. PS is not as important on an email. It's incredibly important on the snail mail. PS, not as important. You can do a sidebar instead if you want. But remember, on email more than anything else, everybody's going to want to lump everything on your email. They're going to want to link to t-shirts for sale. They're going to want to link to their father's birthday party next week. They're going to want to link to everything on your email. You remember, every click leads to the one place you want them to go, or else you're dividing that river. And this is a summary of important points. Before you sit at your keyboard, get in touch with your inner narrator. Be aware of your image. Be sure of your intent. Tell me about a story of an animal you've helped. develop that animal as a character, position your brand, use emotional images, be sensitive to your reader, watch your language, use your voice, make me care, empower me to help more animals, make me feel helpful, hopeful, tell me you're a good investment. Don't forget to ask for money. This is this is one of the most important things they taught me in development communications school, was that the most common mistake is the writer gets all the way to the bottom and forgot to ask for money. They told their story, they talked about how great the organization was, and they forgot to say, we'd like you to make a donation. Now you can do a soft ask or a hard ask, that's up to you. You know, you can do the soft ask where you sort of gently, you know, and we could really use your support and then move right on. Or the hard ask, please give $25 today. You know, that's choice how you word it. There are different styles of wording. You don't have to be obnoxious if you don't want. You can do it. There are lots of gentle ways to ask, but don't forget to ask. And for email appeals, give even more white space. Don't make me ask for the money on the email before the person has to scroll down. Now that is under controversy right now. Actually, that is age old, and everybody has said that forever, but there's some really recent findings that may not be as true as we thought it was, so you know, I might change that next year. But right now, the age-old wisdom is don't make me scroll down before you ask for money on an email. Most importantly, mean what you write. Be that person. And then try writing poetry too. You'll like it. It's a nice change of pace from writing all these fundraising appeals. Thanks, y'all.